Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to this deep dive. It's going to be a tough one today.
Yeah.
You guys sent us this documentary, Germany, Abuses in the Catholic Church, and wow.
It's heavy.
Yeah. And there's so many layers to this thing about the Catholic Church, and
Institutional negligence.
yeah, the negligence is just unbelievable.
Yeah, it's really tough to watch. This documentary, Matías Katsch's story, really reveals a pattern of abuse that spans the globe. And the Catholic Church's role in all of this is just...
I mean, the thing that got me right off the bat is that it's not just one school, one priest, one country, even that this is huge.
Right, and that's what makes Katsch's journey so compelling. He goes from Germany all the way to Chile trying to find his abuser. And in the process, he uncovers this pattern of just moving these abusers around instead of,
Holding them accountable.
Exactly.
And it all starts in Berlin, right? At the Canisius College. That's where Katsch and all these other boys were abused by these two priests, Peter R. and Wolfgang S. And those two priests, instead of facing any consequences, they were just sent to different locations.
And enabling them to continue the cycle of abuse.
Exactly.
And what gets me is this wasn't some, backwater school nobody's ever heard of. This was Canisius College, a prestigious Jesuit school.
Right. And that begs the question, did this prestigious image contribute to the silence surrounding the abuse?
I think that's definitely something to think about. And, in 1981, the school received a letter outlining Peter R.'s inappropriate behavior with the students. Lavish gifts, excessive time spent, overnight stays.
And what did they do with that information?
They transferred him instead of reporting the allegations.
Wow.
It's like they were more concerned with their reputation than protecting these kids.
Yeah, protecting the institution.
And because of their silence, Peter R. was free to continue his abuse. And this time it gets even worse because he gets connected with Sister Carolina. She was a missionary who would visit Canisius and was known for her charity work in Chile.
And this is where the network of abuse becomes really insidious.
Because this is a well-respected figure, Sister Carolina even received the Order of Merit of the Federal Republic of Germany.
Right, like she's a big deal.
And she was close with Peter R. She'd bring teenagers from Chile to live with him in Germany, framing it as, giving them opportunity.
Opportunities that they desperately needed.
Yeah, these were vulnerable teenagers from difficult backgrounds, and they trusted these adults.
And that trust was completely shattered. The documentary suggests that some of these teenagers brought from Chile by Sister Carolina, they became victims of Peter R.'s abuse.
It's just awful, and it makes you wonder, how could someone like Sister Carolina be involved in all this and not know what was going on? Or was it intentional?
That's the question, right. And it points to this larger pattern within institutions like the church, where loyalty protecting the institution, it all comes before holding individuals accountable for their actions.
Yeah, and what's worse is that this denial continues today. In the film, Katsch confronts Sister Carolina, but she denies knowing anything about the abuse, even though she was the one who brought these kids to Peter R.'s home.
Right. And it's scary to think about how difficult it is to get people to acknowledge these horrific acts. These victims are dealing with fear, shame. They feel loyalty to the church.
This is their community, it's all they've ever known.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to speak out against a priest is almost unimaginable for some of them.
It's devastating, especially when you consider what those Chilean teenagers went through. They were brought to a new country looking for a better life, only to be totally betrayed by the people they should have been able to trust the most.
It's difficult to even fathom.
Just awful.
It really is. And the documentary shows us the long-term impact of what these people went through.
Yeah.
Katsch finds some of those Chilean victims as adults. And it's just so hard to watch because you can see their hesitation. They're still afraid to talk about it.
Even after all these years.
Right. And it shows how complicated this is. The abuse happening within the church. I mean, for a lot of these people, their faith is such a huge part of who they are, their community, everything.
Their lives.
Yeah, exactly. So to speak out against a priest, someone who's supposed to represent God, it's a lot.
It makes you question everything, doesn't it? Like the people who are supposed to be protecting you, guiding you spiritually, they're the ones causing the harm.
Yeah, and what's worse is that this silence, this refusal to do anything about it, it allowed Wolfgang S., that other priest who abused Katsch at Canisius, it allowed him to continue his abuse in Chile.
You mean with that Globetrotters youth sports club in Arica?
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
He got moved there after similar accusations came up in Germany, and it seems like he just kept on abusing kids in this new place.
The history repeating itself. And it's directly tied to Sister Carolina's charity work in Arica, too.
Right. The same charity that brought those teenagers to Peter R.'s house in Germany
Yeah,
that's connected to that Globetrotters Club.
yeah.
It's like the system was designed to protect the abusers,
Yeah.
moving them around and...
Instead of protecting the children.
Exactly.
It just makes you wonder how many other Wolfgang S's and Peter R's are out there,
Yeah.
hiding in plain sight.
That's the really disturbing thing about this documentary, isn't it? It forces us to face the fact that this could be happening anywhere. And as long as institutions care more about protecting themselves than protecting people, this will keep happening.
And it's even more concerning when you consider that Wolfgang S. actually admitted to what he did.
He did?
Yeah, in an internal church report.
So did they tell the police then? Did they let the community know?
Doesn't seem like it.
They chose to stay silent. Even with the huge abuse scandal that hit the German church in 2010, even with all that attention, Wolfgang S. was still able to hide.
They let him live his life, maybe even interact with kids with this horrible secret, just buried by the very people who should have exposed him.
It's a classic example of how institutions use their power to silence victims and protect abusers. And it's not just the church either. We see this in schools, sports organizations, you name it.
It's a wake-up call. We can't just assume that respected institutions or figures are always doing the right thing. We have to be willing to question things to hold people accountable no matter who they are.
I agree. And that's what's so powerful about Katsch's story. He refuses to let it go.
Yeah.
He goes to Chile. He tracks down victims. He even confronts the people he used to look up to.
And confronting abusers is such a personal thing, but in a way, his actions started chain reaction, didn't they?
They did. The documentary talks about how Katsch's fight for the truth led to that big German bishop's report in 2018. That's when the church finally admitted publicly that all this abuse had been happening.
And Cardinal Marx apologized?
Right. The head of the German Catholic Church apologized to the victims.
I bet that meant something to those victims, to finally be heard, to have their pain acknowledged after all those years of silence.
He's sure it did. It was a big step. But as the documentary shows, it's just a first step. Saying sorry doesn't erase the trauma. It doesn't guarantee that things will actually change.
Yeah, and that's what's so unsettling about how the documentary ends, right? Because even though the truth is out there, people like Peter R. and Wolfgang S., they haven't faced any real consequences.
That's right. They got to retire quietly, their crimes covered up for all those years.
And at the end, Katsch finds out where Peter R. lives in Berlin. He goes to his apartment building, but decides not to confront him.
What do you think about that?
I don't know. It seems like it would be so hard to decide what to do in that situation. As a survivor, you want justice, but you also don't want to relive all that trauma. Maybe you're even scared of what will happen if you speak out.
It's a heavy burden to carry, and every survivor has to choose their own path to healing and if they want to text to justice.
It's interesting, throughout this whole thing, you really see the role of community in all this. We talk about the church staying silent, protecting the abusers, but even on a smaller scale, the people who knew or suspected what was happening, even indirectly, they were a part of this too.
It's easy to forget about that, isn't it?
Yeah.
We focus so much on the abusers and the institutions themselves, but that culture of silence, it spreads outward.
Yeah, it's like this unspoken agreement to look the other way. Protect the community's reputation, even if it means ignoring these warning signs and not believing the victims.
And the documentary does a good job of showing that subtly. Like when Katsch goes to Erica and talks to the priest who's there now at the church where Wolfgang S. used to work.
Oh, yeah.
He had no idea about Wolfgang's past, even though Wolfgang was a big deal in that community.
It's scary to think about, but abusers often rely on that, that sense of normalcy. They build trust within a community so they can operate without anyone suspecting them.
It's a reminder that we can't just trust blindly. We have to be willing to question things, even when it's uncomfortable, especially in our own circles.
Absolutely. And that kind of ties into Katsch's decision at the end, right? To give the names of those 2 Chilean women to the Hildesheim bishopric.
Oh, right. Even though they'd initially denied knowing anything about them.
Exactly. He refused to let them be ignored.
And that act, as small as it might seem it could be, what finally breaks through the denial.
Yeah.
It might lead to some form of accountability, whether it's financial support therapy or even just acknowledging the harm that was done.
It's a small glimmer of hope in this really dark story, but it shows the power of pushing for the truth no matter how difficult it seems.
It really does.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest takeaway from this whole documentary. It's not about giving easy answers or telling people exactly how to find justice. It's about encouraging us to look inward, to have these uncomfortable conversations, to question the systems that allow abuse to happen in the first place.
This deep dive into Germany, abuses in the Catholic Church, it's been tough to say the least.
Yeah, really heavy stuff.
But it's so important. And as we wrap up here, I think the question we're left with is, what are we going to do with this information? How do we create a world where staying silent isn't an option, where victims are believed and supported, where accountability is just the norm, not some far-off goal?
It's a question we all need to sit with. But more importantly, it demands action. Real change starts with each of us choosing to see, to hear, and to speak up for what's right wherever we see injustice.
And on that note, we'll leave you with this. If anything in this story touched you, if it made you think or feel something even a little uncomfortable, hold on to that feeling. Dig deeper, ask questions, don't be afraid to challenge the way things are. Even the smallest actions can make a difference.